It was a road of great length and numerous inadvisable detours that led me to Myanmar. My gambling addiction was the catalyst, of course, and in my desperation to finally write off all incurred debts, I was willing to take any job opportunity that presented itself to me. But one would think that family could be trusted when trying to crawl out of a vulnerable place. I never expected my uncle, a loved one so near and dear, to be capable of taking advantage of me in that position. He deceived me into flying out to Myanmar for an interview. I did so under the assumption that I'd be applying for a high-paying translation job, something that could resolve my money troubles in a matter of months. It seemed like the answer to all of my problems. Perhaps not a permanent solution, but one that could get me back onto my feet. Work in Myanmar for 6 months to a year, then fly home. That was the plan. But none of that happened. After I arrived in Myanmar, I drove to the supposed company headquarters, which was hidden within the mountains. I was, of course, suspicious when I arrived in the mountain village. Many of the buildings were derelict, and the people seemed to live in squalor. But I dismissed my initial reservations, chastising myself for judging those in an impoverished state. I waited for my uncle to arrive, but he never came. And my thoughts of delays or miscommunication quickly dissipated. Suddenly, a wave of trepidation washed over me. The hair on my flesh stood to attention. And before I could do anything to remove myself from the situation, clammy, ginormous hands gripped my shoulders. I screamed in terror as an unseen man with twice or thrice the strength of me hauled my squirming body into a dark, featureless room. I was forced to hand over my mobile phone, bank card, and any other valuable possessions. And that was the start of my new life in Myanmar. They housed me in a den of iron sheets, along with a dozen other shivering, malnourished victims. With every gust of icy wind that rippled across the iron, we whimpered in terror, frightened that the next creak of the door might not be the wind, but one of our captors. Our jobs involved online fraud, and any moral qualms I had about deceiving innocent people were quickly swept out of my mind, as I watched one woman, refusing to work, who was brutally beaten by half a dozen men of frighteningly large stature. They forced her to sign a work contract that, in the end, resulted in her freedom being constricted beyond that of the victims who simply complied from the beginning. She achieved nothing but bloody, bruised skin and limited daylight. She still, like all of us, had to work. Everybody works, one way or the other. I chose the safer way. It was, perhaps, the first smart decision I'd made since recovering from my gambling addiction. But it didn't matter. Even those of us who worked hard were punished for meaningless trivialities. Completing our work a few minutes too late, or completing our work more slowly than our colleagues. And the punishment was constant, day in and day out. A ceaseless cycle of torture. My esteemed colleagues were dragged to a horrid room that we called the chamber. Just the word on my mouth, even after all of this time, fills me with a deep, relentless sickness. The electric shocks were the second worst punishment. For the briefest moment, every single time it happened, I thought I might die. My body would spasm in such unfathomable pain that I truly believed it to be my end. The worst punishment was one of emotional pain. Eventually, memories of physical pain fades, but the trauma of a particular day stays with me. It haunts me every waking hour. The day on which I failed to seal the deal on a potential online victim. My manager dragged me, crying, into the courtyard, and there, she stripped me bare, before proceeding to whip me across my body. But it isn't the scars that haunt me. Not even the excruciating pain of the whip tearing into my skin. It's the shame of it all. The humiliation that they could take what little dignity I had left. Many more mistakes followed. I endured countless torture, physical punishments, threats of kidneys being sold, and even, eventually, being passed from fraudulent company to fraudulent company. But when I finally seized my chance to flee, I expended every ounce of energy that I had left in me. My feet were bare and bloody from running across rocks, gravel, and dirt. A guard spotted me. Fortunately, he was unarmed, and he pursued me relentlessly. But my will was greater than that of my captor. I was locked in survival mode, and there was no physical pain on earth that could have prevented me from pushing forwards. I would have kept running until my very last breath. And so, fortunately, my captor gave up. He turned around and, most likely, found another victim to replace me on that very same day. Eventually, I made it across the river to Thailand. I tasted freedom. And yet, part of me remains in Myanmar, a part that I know I shall never reclaim. This cautionary tale most likely sent a shiver down your spine, and perhaps that is due, in part, to the haunting reality of such heinous crimes in Myanmar. Reality is often scarier than fiction. If you or a loved one plans on taking a trip to this country, it is of vital importance that you conduct sufficient research before doing so. Ensure that you are well aware of the risks and have taken the necessary precautions to ensure the safety of those who are planning on traveling. If seeking employment in Myanmar, ensure that you have conducted thorough checks into the background of potential employers. Life is cheap in Myanmar. That's what my father told me. And his horror story of what happened to him in that country certainly deterred me from going there. What's wrong with Myanmar? I was thinking we could all go on a family holiday like we did when we were... I started. No, Dad sharply interjected. I mean it. Anywhere but there. Remember that business trip I took for 3 months when you were a teenager? He interrupted a second time. I sighed and nodded. Dad adjusted his glasses, preparing to tell a long story. Men don't really notice risks in the same way as women. Well, perhaps that's a generalization. I certainly didn't notice any risks. My trip to Myanmar, along with 2 of my industry friends, Jack and Phil, started with a job opportunity. My dad sighed. I suppose my colleagues and I let our hair down a bit. We passed our interviews with flying colors. 3 months working for what we assumed to be a reputable company. The interviewer came out with us for some drinks. Steve, he called himself. He seemed like such a lovely, genuine guy to 3 drunken fools who were a long way from home. He wanted to take us gambling. And the next thing we knew, we were all in a taxi together headed far from the city. Far from civilization. He continued. As we stumbled out of the car, hands seized our arms and marched us towards a debilitated warehouse building. Jack, Phil, and me. But Phil? He was always strong-willed, and the alcohol didn't exactly help with that. It only exacerbated his fiery nature. I just wish he'd stayed calm, like they told us. But he didn't. He fought one of the men who manhandled, and another man shot him, point blank, in the head. Jack and I yelled in horror. I vomited on the floor, and I think Jack passed out. We were dragged into the warehouse, and we joined a factory line of people. People from all walks of life. All countries, cultures, languages. Tourists, business people, locals. Who knows? We were all the same there. Captive. Telecom fraud. That was the primary line of work for their slave operation. I worked in sex scams, but they ran all manner of operations. And my job? Well, I had to. It still makes me sick to think about it, but I do extort money out of people. I would pretend to be a woman, flirt with strangers, and then I had to capture incriminating photos of these men, if you catch my drift. I would threaten to show the explicit images to their friends and family, and they had to send endless payments to make us stop. They made them pay until they had nothing left. Things didn't work out for anyone who attempted to escape or even simply didn't pull in the numbers the managers wanted. I saw a man. I can't. I can't put it into words. They dismembered him. I still remember that man, reduced to a torso, an armless, legless body, left outside to rot in the sun. His screams were deafening. but his cries for help slowly died out. Too slowly. They had other ways of incentivizing us to work hard, of course. The better you behaved, the better your gig. And when I ended up in the office upstairs, well, I seized my chance. I watched the men in charge. They came and went at set times. I learned their schedule, and I used that to my advantage. I only had a 5-minute window, but I seized it and I made a call to your mother. I didn't know the Myanmar police number, but I told her everything I knew. The length of the car journey from the bar to the warehouse, what I could see out the window, everything. And then I returned to my desk before I was spotted. "What happened next?" I asked in a hoarse whisper. Dad held his head dejectedly. "Your mother. She contacted the embassy in Myanmar, and they contacted the relevant authorities in Myanmar. Everything happened so quickly after that. They came. The authorities came. They stormed the factory and, well, it was over. It all seemed to be over. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the officers from the officer window. They swept through the warehouse, arresting every manager they could find. But the bosses on the office floor, they had guns and machetes, and they weren't going down without a fight." Dad started crying, and I couldn't figure out why. This was the end of the story. He was alive and well, sitting in front of me. Everything had to be okay. "Who made the call?" our line manager asked. "You think this is the day of your rescue? No, it is not. Who made the call?" my dad said. And I was on the verge of owning up to it, especially when the gunfire, the hacking of limbs. Oh, it was awful. And Jack saw my face. He saw what I was about to do to save all of them, but he didn't let me own up to my mistake. Jack stood up and he said, "It was me." My father and I sat in silence for a little while. It could have been a few seconds, perhaps a few minutes. I don't know. What I do know is that I didn't need him to finish the story, but he needed to finish the story. I could see it in his eyes. Less than a minute after Jack was killed, after he... Dad gulped. The officers charged into the workroom. They gunned down the 3 armed assailants. And that was the end. The end that I wished had come only a few minutes earlier. "So, what happened to Steve?" I asked quietly. I'm not sure why those words left my mouth, but it was the only thing I could say. Dad shook his head, croakily responding. Officials never tracked him down after everything that happened. Steve wasn't exactly his real name, I'm sure, but I still think about him. And I wonder whether he still lures unsuspecting victims into traps. There will be other warehouses, after all. Other factory lines of captured prisoners. And that's a world I never want you to see, Anna. Okay? I nodded, vowing never to speak to my father about the topic again.